Alright, here we go. Number 10. The estoc. In 1989, drainage workers excavating waterlogged ground outside Gdańsk, Poland, struck something rigid approximately 1.8 meters beneath the surface of a peat bog. What they pulled free was a medieval estoc, a rigid, edgeless thrusting sword engineered specifically to punch through the joints of plate armor, and it was still sharp enough to draw blood. The estoc was a weapon designed for a particular kind of violence. Unlike the broad, slashing swords most people picture when they think of medieval combat, the estoc had no cutting edge at all. Its blade was four-sided in cross-section, built entirely for a single purpose: finding the gap in a man's armor and pushing until resistance ended. It was a weapon that required patience, proximity, and intent. What made the Gdańsk find so unsettling was its condition. Anaerobic bog environments, where oxygen cannot penetrate, preserve iron in ways that open ground never could. The blade emerged in near-perfect condition, dated by its typology to the late 14th or early 15th century, the precise period when full plate armor was at its peak across northern Europe. No scabbard came with it, no belt fittings, no ownership markings, no indication of the man who carried it. The Polish Army Museum in Warsaw received the find for conservation and study. Specialists confirmed the blade's construction was consistent with the anti-armor weapons documented throughout the Baltic region during the height of the Teutonic Knights' military campaigns. The bog had sealed it completely, preserving every detail of a weapon that had no business surviving 6 centuries underground. The estoc was made for intimate, deliberate work. Finding one abandoned, ownerless in a sealed bog raises a question the mud has kept for 600 years. What happened to the man who dropped it? Number 9. The Plague Sword. In 2013, a bioarchaeology team from the University of Sheffield excavating a confirmed 14th century mass burial site at Thornton Abbey in Lincolnshire made a discovery that had no place in any record. Beneath 17 bodies stacked in the disorganized pattern typical of plague disposal, they found a knightly longsword, still in partial scabbard, buried at the base of the pit. Mass burial sites from the Black Death, which swept England between 1348 and 1351, have been excavated at several locations across the country. The bodies they contain are anonymous, undifferentiated, stripped of the social markers that defined medieval life. Plague dead were not buried with ceremony. They were not buried with weapons. The logistics of mass death in the 14th century left no room for funerary ritual. The sword was approximately 95 centimeters of double-edged blade with a simple cruciform hilt, and it bore a partial maker's mark consistent with blade production in Solingen, Germany, one of the most prominent centers of European swordsmanship in the medieval period. A weapon of this quality represented significant wealth. Nothing about the bodies surrounding it suggested anyone in that pit could have owned it. Not one skeleton in the grave showed evidence of weapon trauma. Nobody there was killed by this blade. The stratigraphy of the burial confirmed the sword had been placed deliberately at the base of the pit before the bodies were laid on top of it. Someone made a conscious decision to put it there. That decision was not recorded in any surviving document connected to Thornton Abbey or the surrounding parish records. Was it placed in grief, in ceremony, or in some desperate hope that the blade might protect the dead from something worse than plague? The grave has been studied. The question has not been answered. Number 8. The Gothic relic. During structural restoration work at Regensburg Cathedral in Bavaria in 1961, conservators removing a section of 12th century internal masonry discovered a cavity that had been deliberately sealed. Inside, wrapped in the decayed remnants of linen cloth, was a single-handed sword of exceptional Gothic workmanship, its wheel pommel engraved with a Marian devotional inscription in High German. Regensburg Cathedral, formerly known as Dom St. Peter, is one of the great Gothic structures of medieval Bavaria. Its construction stretched across centuries, and its walls hold the accumulated weight of regional ecclesiastical history. Restoration work on buildings of this age routinely uncovers evidence of earlier phases of construction, sealed passages, earlier foundations, and the occasional forgotten object. What the 1961 team found was not a forgotten object, The cavity had been mortared shut with clear intention. The linen wrapping, though largely decomposed, indicated the sword had been prepared for concealment rather than simply hidden in haste. The blade itself, estimated at approximately 82 centimeters and dated to the 13th century by its construction, carried a pommel inscription that translated roughly as, "Maria, Mother of God, protect the bearer." It was a devotional object. It was also a weapon. The Diocesan Museum of Regensburg received this sword for conservation. No church records from the period of concealment survived to explain why a blessed sword had been sealed into consecrated stone. Swords were sometimes sanctified by the medieval church, carried on crusade, touched to relics, or consecrated before battle. None of those practices involved permanent entombment within a cathedral wall. That was done with relics, with objects considered too sacred or too dangerous for ordinary hands. Someone chose to treat this blade as something that needed to be sealed away forever. Was it hidden for safekeeping, for sanctification, or because whoever concealed it decided it was too dangerous to let anyone use it again? Number 7. Dragon's Tooth. In 1978, a farmer plowing a field near Gorge in Transylvania unearthed a curved, single-edged sword with an unusually tapered point and a blade etched along its full length with a continuous serpentine pattern. Local archaeologists from Cluj-Napoca University assumed Ottoman origin. 6 years of metallurgical analysis proved them wrong, and then proved something far stranger. The medieval history of Transylvania is a layered and complex thing. The region sat at the intersection of Hungarian, Byzantine, Ottoman, and Germanic cultural influence across several centuries, and its soil has yielded weapons consistent with all of those traditions. Identifying a blade as belonging to one school or another is, for specialists, a matter of cross-referencing forge technique, blade geometry, carbon content, and decorative convention. Dragon's Tooth matched none of them. The blade's phosphorus content and forge welding pattern were inconsistent with any catalogued regional production school. Its geometry sat between known forms without belonging to any of them. The serpentine etching was described in the published analysis as non-heraldic and non-Islamic, of undetermined symbolic origin. No parallel object existed in any European museum collection that specialists could identify. The National History Museum of Transylvania in Cluj-Napoca holds the sword. The analysis conducted between 1978 and 1984 established what the blade was not with considerable confidence. It established what the blade was with almost none. Every sword was made by someone within a tradition inside a culture that left other evidence of its existence. Dragon's Tooth appears to be the only object its makers ever produced that anyone has found. Whatever tradition forged, it died with the sword's last owner, somewhere in a Transylvanian field, without leaving a single other trace in the archaeological record. Number 6. The Lost Defender. In 2004, archaeologists from INRAP, the Institut National de Recherche Archéologique Préventive, were excavating the ruins of Château Gaillard in Normandy when they have found something the historical record said could not exist. In a layer of collapsed rubble definitively dated to the French siege of 1204, beneath the remains of the Inner Keep's Great Hall, lay a complete garrison sword, undisturbed for 8 centuries. Château Gaillard was built by Richard the Forger of England and was considered one of the most formidable fortifications in medieval Normandy. When Philip II of France laid siege to it in September of 1203, the engagement lasted 6 brutal months before the garrison finally surrendered in March of 1204. The chroniclers of the siege were thorough. They named the commanders, they recorded the terms of surrender, they documented the stripping of the fortress that followed. According to every surviving account, nothing of military value was left behind. The fortress was methodically emptied, its garrison was expelled. What INRAP found in the rubble suggested the historical record had missed something. The sword, approximately 90 centimeters of double-edged blade with a central fuller running 2/3 of its length, and hilt fittings of copper alloy, was found in a stratigraphic layer confirming it had been trapped during or immediately after the siege. It was not lost later. It was there from the beginning. The Musée de Normandy in Caen received the find for conservation. The INRAP report confirmed the dating. The sword was exactly where it should not have been, given everything the historical record tells us about what happened at Chateau Gaillard in the spring of 1204. The historical record named the commanders. It did not name the last man in the Great Hall. His sword has waited 800 years to be found, and we still don't know whether he walked out of that keep or whether the ceiling came down first. Number 5. The Great Sword. In 1848, workers draining a section of marshland along the River Witham in Lincolnshire brought up a two-handed sword of such extraordinary dimensions that the British Museum's initial catalogue entry described it with a word that rarely appears in institutional documentation. The word was abnormal. The River Witham had already established itself as a site of significant medieval discovery. A 13th century shield found along the same waterway had demonstrated that the river held objects of genuine historical weight. Medieval rivers across Britain served as sites of ritual deposit, places where communities surrendered valuable objects to the water in acts that blended religious practice with commemoration. Finding weapons in them was not unprecedented. Finding a weapon of this scale was something else entirely. The sword measured 157 centimeters in total length, with a blade of 119 centimeters and a weight of approximately 2.7 kilograms. Standard two-handed swords of the late 13th and early 14th century, the period consistent with this blade's hilt typology, typically ran between 130 and 140 centimeters overall. This one exceeded those dimensions significantly. No inscription marked it, no heraldic device identified its owner. The blade bore no evidence of sharpening wear. The British Museum holds the sword today. The absence of any sharpening wear, combined with the river context and the complete lack of ownership marking, led specialists to consider the possibility that this was never a combat weapon. An object of this scale, apparently never prepared for actual use, recovered from a site with documented ritual significance, suggests it was made not to fight with, but to be seen, to represent something, to announce someone. Whatever the River Witham received this sword from, it was almost certainly not a battlefield, and whoever the sword was made for was not an ordinary man. Number 4. The Drowned King's Blade. In 1905, Swedish archaeologist Oskar Wennersten began excavating the mass graves surrounding the walls of Visby on the island of Gotland, site of one of the most catastrophic single-afternoon massacres of the medieval period. Among the skeletal remains of the men killed there, his team found a knightly sword of high manufacture that had no business being in a peasant grave. On July 27, 1361, Danish forces under Valdemar IV Atterdag annihilated the Gotlandic peasant militia outside the walls of Visby. The engagement lasted hours. When it was over, an estimated 1,800 men lay dead in the summer heat. The mass graves that followed were documented in Bengt Thordeman's landmark 1939 study, Armour from the Battle of Visby, which remains the foundational text on the site. The graves contain approximately 1,685 identified individuals, many still wearing the male armor in which they died, preserved by the rapid burial that the scale of the killing demanded. Wennersten's team found, at the base of one of the pits, beneath 3 layers of skeletal remains, a sword with a gold-inlaid crossguard bearing a partial heraldic device. It did not match any confirmed Danish or Swedish noble house of the period that specialists have been able to identify. The sword was knightly equipment. Every man laid on top of it was a peasant militiaman. The social distance between the object and the dead surrounding it was absolute. The Gotlands Museum in Visby holds the sword. The heraldic device remains unidentified. The grave context confirmed the sword had been placed at the base of the pit before the bodies were laid in, meaning someone made a deliberate choice to put it there at the moment of burial. Someone placed a knight's blade at the bottom of a mass grave filled with peasants, and the name of that knight has been lost to every record we have. Number 3. The Executioner's Blade. In 1936, during the demolition of an old civic building in Nuremberg, workers discovered a locked iron chest bricked into a basement wall. Inside was an executioner's sword, a broad, rounded-tipped blade of the type used for beheading in the Holy Roman Empire. and a handwritten vellum list of 87 names, each accompanied by a date and a recorded method of execution. The entries spanned from 1573 to 1618. The Nuremberg executioner's office was one of the most bureaucratically rigorous in the German-speaking world. The city's civic records from this period are among the best preserved in the Holy Roman Empire, and execution in Nuremberg was a formal civic function, documented, witnessed, and archived. The names of the condemned, the dates of their deaths, and the methods applied were recorded as a matter of administrative routine. This was not an age that left judicial killing undocumented. The vellum list found in the chest matched no surviving civic record. 87 names spanning 45 years of executions, with 12 entries marked by a small cross whose meaning has not been definitively established, though some specialists have suggested it denoted noble blood, and not one of them appeared in the official Nuremberg execution registers for the same period. The blade itself was consistent with Nuremberg guild production of the late 16th century, approximately 85 centimeters, with engraved execution scenes along both faces, a practice documented among German executioners as a professional record of their work. The Germanisches National Museum in Nuremberg holds the sword. Conservation analysis confirmed the blade's manufacture and period. The vellum list has been examined and authenticated. The names on it have been compared against every surviving civic archive from the relevant decades. They do not appear in any of them. Whether these 87 people were the lawfully condemned recorded in a lost register, or whether this is a sword that kept its own secrets precisely because its work was never meant to be official, has not been resolved. Number 2. Crusader's Edge. In 1984, maintenance workers clearing a drainage channel beneath the old city of Jerusalem struck stone, found a cavity behind it, and handed what was inside to Israeli archaeologists. What emerged was a cross-hilted sword, Western European in form, with a Brazil nut pommel and a tapered fuller consistent with 12th century Crusader manufacture, concealed in a sealed underground passage that appeared in no architectural survey of the city. Byzantine, Ottoman, or Crusader. The Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem existed from 1099 until its effective collapse at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, when Saladin's forces destroyed the kingdom's assembled military power in a single afternoon. The fall of Jerusalem followed within months. What remained of the Crusader presence in the Levant persisted in coastal strongholds for another century, but Jerusalem itself was lost. The men who had held the city left quickly, or did not leave at all. The Latin inscription on the sword's crossguard was partially legible. Specialists identified the phrase as reading in fragmentary form, Dio et Regi, to God and the King, a formulation consistent with the feudal and religious oaths that bound Crusader knights to both sacred and temporal authority. The passage in which the sword was found was not on any record. Its existence was not known before the drainage work opened the wall. The cavity had been sealed from the inside. The Israel Antiquities Authority recorded the find. The physical location of the sword has not been publicly confirmed in any subsequent institutional statement. A blade bearing an oath to God and a king, hidden in a passage that should not exist, beneath one of the most contested pieces of ground in human history, and its current whereabouts remain unconfirmed. A man sealed the sword into a wall beneath Jerusalem sometime before or during the collapse of everything he had sworn to defend, and whatever he hoped to protect it from, the wall held for 800 years. Number 1. The altar blade. In 1927, archaeologist Carl Kersten, excavating a sacrificial deposit at Thorsberg Moor in Schleswig, Denmark, uncovered something that had no precedent in the entire documented history of Germanic ritual sites. At the center of the deposit was a Roman pattern spatha, a long cavalry sword, approximately 88 centimeters of blade, that had been deliberately bent, wrapped in gold foil, placed on a purpose-built stone altar, and surrounded by the burned bones of at least 4 people. Thorsberg Moor is one of the most significant Germanic ritual deposit sites in Northern Europe. Communities used it continuously from roughly the 1st through the 5th century AD, surrendering weapons, armor, tools, and personal ornaments to the site in acts of religious offering. The practice of killing a weapon before deposit, bending or breaking it so it could not be used again, is extensively documented across Germanic culture and is understood as a form of consecration, removing the object from the human world and delivering it to the divine. Hundreds of such deposits have been recovered from Thorsberg and comparable sites. None of them look like this. Offerings were thrown into water or buried in the ground. They were surrendered. The spata at the center of Kersten's 1927 excavation was not surrendered. It was enthroned. The stone altar beneath it was purpose-built, a structure that had no functional parallel in any Germanic deposit site then or since. The gold foil wrapping the blade was not a material of casual offering, and the burned bones of at least 4 individuals surrounding the altar were not the remains of animals. Associated coinage dated the deposit to approximately 250 to 300 AD. The blade carried a runic inscription along its length. The translation is contested among runologists, but one reading, supported by specialists, at the Archäologisches Landesmuseum in Schleswig, which holds the sword today, renders the inscription as approximately, "I belong to no man." The inscription was not added later. It was cut into the iron when the blade was made. What Kersten had found was not an offering. Every other object at Thorsberg was given to something larger than itself. This sword had something given to it. 4 people at minimum appear to have died in its presence, their bones burned and arranged around the altar in a configuration that has no documented parallel. Someone in 3rd century Schleswig took a Roman military sword, inscribed it with a declaration of its own independence from human ownership, wrapped it in gold, built it a throne, and surrounded it with the dead. The Thorsberg deposit has been studied for nearly a century. The altar configuration remains without parallel, the runic claim remains contested, the bone assemblage remains unexplained. We have the blade, we have the altar, and we have the message cut into the iron by the hands that made it. A message that says the sword knew exactly what it was. Every civilization that has ever existed has made weapons and called them sacred, but somewhere in the marshland of 3rd century Schleswig, a group of people reversed that logic entirely, and they left the proof of it wrapped in gold in the dark of the moor for 1700 years, waiting for someone to finally understand what they had done. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.